Articles in Spanish. If you're new to Spanish and you're trying to figure out what the hell these things are and how to use them, if you stick around, I'll explain how to do just that. So stay tuned. Anyways, what are these things? Well, let me give you an English example to start off with so you kind of know what we're working with here. Same principle applies to Spanish. In English, we have definite and indefinite articles. Same thing in Spanish, right? Give you a quick example. Definite would be the in English, right? The car, the moon, the sun, etc., etc. The sofa, the coffee mug, etc. Anyways, it's something that we can define. That's why it's definite. And what do I mean by that exactly? Well, if you're talking about a thing specifically, like the sun, the moon, there are only one of those. You know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, technically speaking, if we're talking about other galaxies and stuff, whatever. But, in this solar system, there's only one sun and there's only one moon that revolves around this Earth. So, we know what we're defining when we say the. Indefinite article, English would be a or an, right? So, for example, an apple, right? I ate an apple. Okay, so why is it not the apple? Because it could be any apple. Let's say I have a bunch of apples. I ate an apple. If I'm explaining this to someone, I could be like, oh, I ate the third apple from the back of the fridge. That would be the definite one because you're telling the person what specific apple you're talking about. If you just told someone, hey, I ate an apple, they don't know which apple you ate, an apple, right? Let's say, since this just came out, let's say I bought a Nintendo Switch. I didn't, but let's just use that example. There are many, 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 many Nintendo Switches to buy, but if I say I bought a Nintendo Switch, it doesn't matter which one you picked up at the store, you bought an indefinite Nintendo Switch. I'm also gonna include some here, even though it's technically a little bit different. It's a quantifier because this is going to apply to Spanish when we get into that in just a second. So for example, if I ate some strawberries from the fridge, let's use that fridge example again. There are many strawberries. You ate more than one, so you ate some strawberries, right? In Spanish, it would be unas fresas. Okay. So with that out of the way, that's the English counterpart, so you kind of able to wrap your head around how this kind of works. All right, important thing before we also get started. Spanish is a gendered language. What do I mean by that exactly? Well, in Spanish, everything, every noun, object, etc., is either masculine or feminine. Everything, right? Everything in Spanish is masculine or feminine, right? In English, the sun, the moon, the car, it's neutral. You don't really have a gender for that. In Spanish, not the case. Let's say we're talking about, let's go with colored markers again, just to illustrate the point. If we're talking about el coche, that would be the car, right? I know in some Latin American Spanish variants, they will say el carro, in Castilian Spanish, the variant I speak. Carro would be like a shopping cart, something you push at the supermarket, right? So el coche. What else? El coche, el autobús, o el bus. El auto, el autobús. Autobús. The bus, right? It's masculine, right? You wouldn't say la autobús, because autobús or bus is masculine, right? El sol would also be a masculine, Now, So, la is the feminine article, right? So we would say la luna, oops, the moon, right? We would say la ventana, the window, right? We would say la consola, the console, right? La Nintendo Switch, etc., etc. So, why am I making a point out of this? Because going back to our example from earlier, definite and indefinite articles, let's go back to the. The, in English, is kind of split up in Spanish, right? Into 4 different articles, right? For the singular, we have el. Also have la for feminine, like I illustrated earlier. But if we're talking about, multiples or something, 2 or more, los and las. So, this might be confusing to some people. So, when I recommend studying Spanish, first thing I'll tell you, right? If you're ever learning a noun or something, please learn it with the correct article. It'll make your life way easier when you go to actually speak the language, right? So, el, la, los, and las. All of these mean the in English, which is why I made a point out of that earlier. Okay, so before I move on, let me just explain this real quick. These are singular, and these are plural. Okay, so, for example, like I said earlier, if we're talking about the car, singular, one car, it would be el coche, right? If we're talking about the singular feminine, it would be, let's go back to consola, la consola, right? If we're talking about the cars, plural, 2 or more cars, los coches. And if we're talking about 2 or more consoles, las consolas. All right. I don't know why I've been talking about the Nintendo Switch in this video, honestly. Haven't gotten the Switch 2 yet, looks interesting, but, I think I'm gonna wait a little bit before I finally pull the trigger on that. If there are any Nintendo fans in the comments, comment down below. Very cool stuff. Anyways, let's go back to that definite articles. So, for example, let's talk a little bit longer about definite articles. Okay. La luna es bonita. La luna es bonita. The moon is beautiful. Right, so we have the definite article, la, because it goes in front of luna, which is moon, because there's only one moon that we're talking about, generally speaking. Es bonita, is beautiful. Okay? El coche es grande. Right? Definite article, we're talking about a specific car in this case. El coche es grande, right? The car is big. Okay, and if we're talking about general statements as well, we can use the definite article as well. So for example, if I'm talking about strawberries and I'm saying strawberries are good, las fresas, fresas is strawberries, by the way, son deliciosas. The strawberries are delicious. Las fresas son deliciosas. All right. Strawberries are delicious, by the way. If you disagree, make sure you tell me why in the comments below. But I love strawberries. Strawberries taste pretty good. Los coches son rápidos. The cars are fast, right? One thing you'll notice here, when I'm describing the car, right, the adjective is also plural. Instead of saying the cars are fast, los coches son rápidos, we would end that plural S at the end of the adjective, since we're talking about more than one thing. Okay, now that you kind of have a decent idea on what definite articles are, let me go over one specific case that works with, él. So, like in English, in Spanish you can find some contractions for certain things, right? So, for example, a él y de él. When we're speaking in Spanish, these both have contractions. You're not going to find these same contractions for la, los, and las, right? If we're talking about a él, right, to the, for example, we would say me voy, no. What's a better example? Okay, here we go. Me voy al bar. So, a él turned into al, to the, al bar. Instead of having these two separate, it just sounds better if you put them together. So that contracts into al. And de él, that way you don't have these two together, these two vowels together, I should say, it contracts to de él. For example, vuelvo del trabajo. See? I come back from the job, del trabajo. And again, these contractions you're only going to find with él. You're not going to find it with la, los, and las. So. All right, all right, all right. Cool. So now we got definite articles out of the way. Let's talk about indefinite articles real quick. Okay, put a little asterisk by some because you'll see here in just a second. So we have una, unos, unas. So you know how in English we use a or an depending on if, the following word starts with a consonant or a vowel? In Spanish, it's a little bit different. A and an are both un and una, right? There's no distinction between, if you're using it in front of a vowel or if you're using it in front of a consonant. Some, on the other hand, means unos y unas, right? So in Spanish, you're gonna see this a bunch, right? So going back to those fruit examples from earlier, apples, strawberries, etc., right? If you're not talking about any specific strawberry or any specific apple or any specific food item or item in general, you're not, defining it specifically, we would use the indefinite articles like un, una, unos, y unas. Okay, so if I say, he comido melocotón, I ate a peach, right? He comido un melocotón. I'm just gonna put the cap over there. Yeah, back to that. He comido un melocotón. Why is it un instead of el? Because you're just saying, hey, I ate a peach. Doesn't matter which peach I ate. Let's say you have 10 peaches in the fridge, right? You ate a peach, I comido un melocotón. I ate a peach. And if your buddy asks you, okay, which peach did you eat? Let's say he had a peach he really wanted to eat out of all the peaches. You could say, no sé, he comido el melocotón de la izquierda. I ate the peach on the left. Not literally translated, but some things, when you go back and forth in Spanish or English, you can't literally translate. But that's some more advanced level stuff that we'll go over in later videos. If I say, same principle applies, right? If I say, he comido una manzana, I ate an apple, right? Oh, doesn't matter which apple. Let's say you got 10 apples again, right? I ate an apple, indefinite, right? So when you're talking about something non-specific again, it would be that. And let's go to unos and unas real quick. Let's say we have some grapes. Let's do it in the form of a question. ¿Quieres comer unas uvas? ¿Quieres comer unas uvas? Do you want to eat some grapes? Ah, sí, quiero comer unas uvas. Do you want to eat some grapes? Yeah, I want to eat some grapes. Quiero. All right. Cool. Before we go on, let me give you a quick example of where you wouldn't want to use the article, right? So for example, if you're talking about a profession, if you want to say he is a teacher, you would just say es profesor. Or es profesora if you're talking about feminine teacher. You wouldn't put the article like es un profesor, just one of the exceptions in Spanish, unless it's followed by an adjective, right? So you wouldn't say es un profesor, right? You wouldn't do that. You would just say es profesor. But if you follow it by an adjective, i.e. a descriptive word, you could put, for example, es un profesor bueno. Es un profesor malo. Es un profesor alto. Es un profesor bajo. You know, whatever descriptive word you want to say, whether the professor is good, bad, tall, short, that's when you would put the article, right? So again, if you're talking about a profession, you would not include that. And by the way, if you need some help learning Spanish, there's going to be a link in the description where you can work with me one-on-one. So if you want to be able to speak Spanish in the next 60 to 90 days, highly recommend you check that out. Now, let's go on to some exceptions. Exceptions. Okay, so most of the time, this stuff is pretty self-explanatory on what's masculine and what's feminine, right? If it ends in O, it's probably 9 times out of 10 gonna be masculine, right? El carro, right? If it ends in A, chances are it's feminine, la luna. See? But there are exceptions to this rule. For example, the word planeta. Means planet, right? So it ends in A. You would think it would be la planeta, but it's not. It's el planeta. Okay. Sistema. You think it would be la sistema, since it ends in A, but no. It would be el sistema, right? And why is that? It ends in A. Well, one thing, let me explain real quick. If it ends in PA, MA, or TA, you know, it might start with el instead of la, like el mapa, el sistema, el planeta, etc. Some other common exceptions would be, what's the word I'm looking for? When something is actually like disguised, right? Like agua. It's actually feminine, but it starts with the masculine article. Let me explain. It has a disguised gender. El agua. Right? If the first syllable is stressed, right? It starts with A or HA. And this is like the first syllable, like agua. It's actually feminine, but it starts with the masculine article. So, what do I mean by this? If I say el agua fría, the cold water, right? Fría is feminine. Frío is masculine, right? Even though it starts with the masculine article, it's still a feminine word. What else? Oh yeah, some things that sound like they would be masculine, but it's actually a shortened word and it's actually feminine. Like for example, la foto. It ends in O and it sounds like it should be masculine, but it's actually feminine because foto is actually short for fotografía, which means photograph. All right. And yeah, let me just give you one more quick example. La moto. The motorcycle, motorbike, right? It ends in O, so it sounds like it should be masculine. So, moto is actually short for motocicleta. Which means motorcycle. So, one of those things as well, if a word is like a shortened form of another word, the same word, you might find that exception. So what I highly recommend when learning any noun, always learn it with the correct article. And that's about it. Like, comment, and subscribe if you have any questions for me. If you want me to make a specific video for you, just let me know and I'll be more than happy to do so. See you next time.